Bethesda has built a reputation over the years for producing open-world role-playing games unlike any other on the market. Their specialty in building vast handcrafted worlds that also share a level of depth unmatched by any other games in the genre are why their flagship games like Skyrim and Fallout 4 still see a lot of attention to this day. Though alongside this specialty, their games also have a reputation for just how broken they can be. When dealing with such a huge landscape, it's inevitable they'll miss some things that aren't quite working as they should during the playtesting phase. But these glitches have become somewhat iconic, and characteristic even of the games Bethesda produces. Sure, these glitches can sometimes affect the games in a negative way, but they've never really detracted from the sheer quality of the product, and most of them are usually harmless, funny occurrences. However, Starfield, Bethesda's newest addition to their roster of open-world games, is not your typical Bethesda game, and in this video I'm going to cover why that is. I'll start by providing my general opinion before I go into the specifics of what is good about the game and what isn't. Released in early September of 2023, Starfield is an open-world action-adventure space exploration role-playing game set in a time where humanity managed to conquer the stars. You play as your own customizable character and work your way up from a simple mining worker to whatever the hell you want to be. You can explore a vast array of solar systems and travel to hundreds of different planets, making a name for yourself within the settled systems. Forming an opinion on Starfield has been extremely tricky for me, as while there's multiple elements of the game I enjoy and think they're a marked improvement over previous titles, there's too many issues that are difficult to overlook at times. That does not necessarily mean I haven't enjoyed Starfield. I definitely think it's superior to the likes of Fallout 4, and I've enjoyed playing it more, though I'd argue there's a lot of missed potential. So far I'm sat at 116 hours of playtime, and I've completed the United Colonies faction quest as well as the Crimson Fleet faction quest, siding with SysDef. I also completed the Neon Gangs faction quest, killing both sides. I plan to do the Freestar Collective and Ryujin faction quests at some point, but I haven't found the motivation to start them yet. I have not completed the main Constellation questline, though I'll get into why that is in a later section. I honestly don't think playing through the Freestar Collective and Ryujin faction quests will change my opinion much. I'm level 101 in the game, and I think I've encountered every element it has to offer. No amount of extra narrative is going to sway what I think of the game now, so without further delay, let's get into the specifics of what I think about Starfield. Right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the good in Starfield is the ship customization. It's a standout feature that offers limitless potential depending on how far you want to take it. It's simple enough that you can take a pre-built ship and add your own modifications to it with little effort, or you can take it to the extreme and build your very own custom ship. I never took it to such an extreme. The furthest I got was adding some extra living quarters, as well as some extra guns and state-of-the-art tech. Perhaps one day I'll be brave enough to make my own ship, but the fact that the builder is easy enough to understand that you can take it to either of those extremes makes it a standout feature to me. One of the traits you can pick at the start of the game allows you to be hunted by bounty hunters, and quite honestly, this is a must-have trait if you want to keep the game somewhat interesting. They'll show up out of nowhere and ambush you on planets as well as in space. Sure, they're just regular enemies that show up to kill you, but it makes certain situations pretty hectic. You might be all out of ship parts to repair your ship, and as you're traveling you could be ambushed, leading to a tense dogfight where the only thing keeping you from certain death is your shields. I honestly think my time playing this game would have been much more boring without this trait, and I wish there were more game-changing traits like this. Being able to build outposts on planets is certainly a cool concept. Sadly, in execution, there's not much to it compared to prior games. As far as I know, outposts don't get attacked like they do in Fallout 4, and all they're really used for is mining up resources. It doesn't really serve as a homestead for you to hang out at, and for that reason I never really delved into outpost building. It's cool that it's there, and if Bethesda had designed it better, I'm sure it would have been more of a standout feature like the ship building, but it's not as nuanced. Would still consider it a plus, as it's at least something else to play around with. The gun combat feels miles better than Fallout 4. It's a lot more responsive and tight compared to prior games, and the guns feel satisfying to shoot when they actually hit the targets. Their sound design has gotten quite a buff, sounding a lot more visceral and impactful. It might not be on par with the likes of Call of Duty, but if you've played prior Bethesda games, you'll certainly notice the difference. This one is based on personal preference, but I love the bounty board. I don't like the missions where you have to deliver some resource to an outpost because that's pretty boring, but I love hunting down pirate ships and killing wanted criminals. It gives you a reason to go explore these random planets and rewards you well monetarily as well as in experience points. It's probably the one thing that keeps me coming back to the game after all is said and done. Some people may find it boring repeating the same thing over and over again, but for my ADHD brain, it's just non-stop fun. It's also something that I think was lacking in prior games. Certainly after there became less things to do in Skyrim and Fallout, my interest kind of fell off because there was nothing left to do. But thankfully Starfield has these repeatable missions, which at least gives me something to do when I want to roleplay as a bounty hunter. The faction quests are definitely the main highlight in terms of story in this game. Constellation, the group you're kind of just thrust into at the beginning of the game, has an extremely mind-numbing quest line of constant fetch quests, and thankfully the various factions offer a much more interesting story. Whether it's battling aliens with the United Colonies or infiltrating the Crimson Fleet pirates with SysDef, to just getting involved in gang warfare on Neon. These questlines are far more interesting than the main story and are definitely worth your time, as they're also much more rewarding. New Game Plus also has an interesting spin on it. While yes, you do lose all your gear, there is a major change in the context of events if you decide to enter this mode. I'm not going to spoil what that is in case anyone actually does care for Starfield's rather lame main quest story, but I assure you it had me quite intrigued. Nothing would intrigue me enough though to part with my massive stash of unique weaponry and armor, but it is something that I think is a cool bonus if you decide to rush the main story and nothing else. There is a customization system to your weapons and spacesuits, but I can't comment much on it because I haven't invested too much into it. It looks like how Fallout 4's weapon and armor customization was, and if it is similar to that, then that's a good bonus to have. I don't understand all of its intricacies though, so I won't comment further on it, other than that it's good it's in the game. There's one final good point that I can think of, though I saved this one for last because it will segue me nicely into the bad elements of the game. I mentioned right at the start that Bethesda prides itself on its vast, dense, handcrafted worlds. With Starfield, Bethesda wanted to go even further than just a single world. They built an entire galaxy full of dozens of solar systems and hundreds, potentially thousands of planets for you to explore. The only issue is handcrafting hundreds of different planets would take decades to complete, especially if they wanted to make them as densely populated with points of interest as they had done with Skyrim and Fallout 4. Starfield sadly sacrifices that handcrafted polish and density in favour of having procedural generation. What that does is generate structures randomly based on a set of algorithms. For example, I can land on a planet anywhere in Starfield. Each time I click on the planet, it generates a biome and a set amount of points of interest within the area you touch down in. Each point of interest is a procedurally generated cell. These cells are randomized based on set structures the developers have built. So for example, one of these cells is an abandoned weapons station. Other types of cells include an abandoned mine, a deserted mineral outpost, and an abandoned hangar. These structures can appear randomly in any given spot on a planet, except in major cities. Now the reason for this being in both the good and bad section is because I don't have anything against procedural generation if it's done right. For procedural generation to work well, you need a gazillion different kinds of cell structures, with every item placement and enemy placement being randomized. The more randomized each element of a cell is, the more interesting they'll be, and the slower you'll get bored of them. The trouble with the way Starfield procedurally generates structures is that the algorithm has about 12 different structures to choose from. Worse still is nothing about the cells themselves are randomized. To illustrate this, this is me going to an abandoned weapons station in the Volii system on Volii Psi, one of the moons of Volii Tau. Some memorable parts of this cell are the weapon racks in the kitchen, a ping pong table with a bottle on one of the corners, an emergency protocol slate on a desk next to the bunk beds, an industrial and weapons workbench in the hangar, a robot holding pod, and some scaffolding next to a landed ship with some weapon cases. There's also a crate in the main control room with a helmet in a display cabinet. And now this is me in the Aborum Prime system on Aborum 3-C, a moon of Aborum 3. As you can see, I've managed to find the exact same cell. Here's the ping pong table with the bottle, the weapons rack in the kitchen, the emergency protocol by the bedside, the industrial and weapons workbenches, the robot holding pod, the scaffolding with the weapons cases next to the ship, and finally the main control room's crate with the same helmet display cabinet. This occurs with all other cell types, so if you find 2 abandoned mines, their layouts will be identical, with all the items being in the exact same spots as the abandoned mine on another planet. The only randomized items are the ones in crates or loot containers, but even those are in the exact same spots. I cannot tell you how many times I found the cell where the robots guard an outpost because the human workforce has been banned, and the only way to make the robots not attack you is to change their settings on a computer. If there were hundreds of different cells with randomized item and enemy placements, I feel like the procedural generation here would be a prime example of this done right, but sadly it leans in the complete opposite direction. The major cities were thankfully blessed with being actually handcrafted and are much more fun and exciting to be in, and it's clear these received a lot more attention compared to the algorithm for the procedural generation. I think they were way too ambitious with this, and should have stuck to each faction having their own solar system with more handcrafted unique planets, and in turn allowing them more time to work on the procedural algorithm. Perhaps in future updates or DLC they might add more types of cells, but as of current, the pool size for the algorithm is way too small, and therefore makes planet exploration quite boring and uneventful. Speaking of boring and uneventful, planet traversal in this game is precisely that. I told you it'd be a good segue into the bad section. Planet traversal in this game looks like this. There's no ground vehicles that allow for faster exploration, no hover bikes or whatever. You have to run from point A to point B, and the distance between each point of interest is hundreds of meters. If you don't have AMP on hand, a medicine that increases your movement speed, it takes anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes to reach where you're going on a planet. If you're encumbered, which will be more often than not, you have to make that journey twice, as you won't be able to fast travel back to your ship. This makes doing as simple a task as killing a wanted criminal take upwards of 20 minutes, with 2 of those minutes making up actual fun gameplay. This is one of my biggest gripes with the game, and is made even worse with menu navigation. Doing anything outside of actually shooting something is a massive chore. If I want to use anything other than your bog standard healing item, I have to navigate to the aid menu from my inventory menu, scroll until I find the healing item, and then use it. If I want to travel to a new planet, I need to fast travel to my ship, take off, then when I'm in space, load up the map, travel to a solar system with the planet I want to go to, travel to the planet, boot up my map again, then select to land on the planet. At least that's what I thought the process was, until I tested if I could just instantaneously fast travel to another planet, which I could, but that's for another section. Selling items to vendors is a literal nightmare, because they never have enough store credit on them. So you have to wait 48 hours for their store credit to refresh, only to sell like 6 of your items and then have to wait again for another 48 hours, which takes roughly 3 minutes before you can sell again. This happens multiple times. So selling your haul of gear takes something like 15 minutes, maybe more, to do. Why? It pains my soul. I'm pretty sure 2/3 of my playtime in this game is navigating menus and waiting for stores to refresh their credits. I don't know why they didn't just name this game Star Chart, because that's all you're ever gonna look at! Sorry, got a little bit irrational there. Menu navigation is awful, and a painfully slow process for absolutely no reason. Let's move on before that happens again. I briefly mentioned this in passing, but I must give it its own section, just based on how many issues it causes. The amount of carry capacity you have is abysmal. Considering research stations and upgrade stations require you to be pretty loaded when it comes to resources and materials, the default carry capacity is just simply not enough. Sure, there's books that allow you to permanently upgrade your carry capacity, but they don't stack. So for the majority of your playtime, you will be encumbered. And again, like I previously mentioned, the penalty for being encumbered is ridiculous. Not only does it make traversal a nightmare, having to stop every 2 seconds to wait for your suit's CO2 level to drop, but it also prevents fast travel. So you either have 2 options. You run around at 1 health all the time, being blind as a bat and doubling your traversal time because you can't fast travel, or you dump everything in your inventory and make a bunch of smaller excursions, gathering specific things to drag back to your ship, taking roughly the same amount of time as it would while being encumbered. It's a nightmare. Investing in the carry weight capacity skill does help, but the more you progress, the more items you'll want to have on hand, which gradually mitigates that bonus. Bethesda seriously needs to adjust this because it doubles the already lengthy amount of time it takes to travel anywhere. I said at the start of the video I'd talk about the Constellation questline and why I didn't do it, but I'm only going to mention it briefly because it was just that boring. I have no desire to complete the main Constellation questline for several reasons. The first being that once you do complete it, you go into New Game Plus mode. What it doesn't tell you is you lose all your items when doing so. I've collected nearly every single unique weapon in the game, and I'm not about to lose all of them. Additionally, all it amounts to is collecting a bunch of artifact pieces over and over again, and I lost interest super fast. Plus, the faction quests are miles better and far more interesting. It just doesn't hold up. The lack of accessibility settings is also quite staggering. There's no brightness or gamma slider, no options to change how detailed the textures are, no field of view slider, for a while at least, until they added one, and I'm pretty sure the game runs better somehow with FSR2 turned off. I'm not sure how they managed to make that happen, considering the FSR option in other games gives me upwards of 20 extra frames. There's no quality option for it either, just a sharpness slider. For a game that already chugs in terms of performance, these settings not working correctly and some options being completely absent is unacceptable, and I don't see them implementing FSR better or adding the option to change the texture quality anytime soon. As much as I praised the ship customization, the ship combat barely has any depth to it. There's no countermeasures to enemy missiles or fun active tools to use. You just unload all your ammunition into an enemy fighter until it explodes. It is cool that you can disable specific parts of a ship, but the battles don't last long enough for these to be any problem. There is the option to board enemy ships once you disable their engines, which is a neat inclusion, but your ship never gets boarded if your engines get fried, so there's not much risk. Even when you initiate the boarding process, the enemy crew doesn't try to counterboard you. Some ships can't even be boarded because they don't have the module for it, forcing you to blow up their ship. If the ship combat was more interesting and the fights lasted longer, I'm sure I'd be praising this element, but sadly it doesn't amount to much. A lack of evil companions, or ones that lack an affinity system altogether, is rather disappointing. If you want to be an evildoer, you'll sadly have to do it alone, as every companion in this game is a goody two-shoes who will hate you the second you step out of line. I found this odd, considering one of the companions, Andrea, has a not-so-perfect background in smuggling, and has a skill set you'd expect from someone with a morally ambiguous background. Yet suddenly she has a heart of gold when she meets you, and will scold you at every turn if you don't provide a morally sound answer. It's a shame because this disincentivizes any kind of differing playstyles, and while it is possible to be a space pirate alone, a lot of things are just much more fun with a companion by your side. Now let's get into the two biggest gripes I have with this game. The first is the complete lack of weapon variety in certain weapon categories. Ballistic weapons got the most attention in this game by a mile, with them having dozens of different ammo types and weapon styles for you to choose from. Laser weapons, on the other hand, have 5 different variants, and particle weapons only have 4. There's technically only one melee weapon in the game, because they all have the same swing speed, just with a different skin. They completely lack in varied attack speeds or movesets, which makes all of them identical, besides their appearance. This is ridiculous, and makes finding new weapons really boring, as most are just variants of the same kind of gun. And probably my biggest gripe of all, there are absolutely 0 unique weapons. In Fallout 4 you had weapons like the Cryolator, which you could only get from the vault you start the game in, the Alien Pistol, which you could get from a spaceship that randomly crashes at a specific location, or the Broadsider, which you could only get from completing Captain Ironside's quest aboard the USS Constitution. These were all one-of-a-kind guns with unique properties and ammo types. Starfield doesn't have these, and instead opts for unique variants of the same old guns you'll come across in the game naturally. This didn't stop me from collecting almost all of them, but this was more so done out of curiosity to see if there were any one-of-a-kind weapons. Sadly, my search was for nothing. My disappointment was immeasurable, and my day was ruined. It's a shame, because there seemed like such creative freedom to make some seriously badass weaponry, yet they just chose to be lazy. This laziness courses through all elements of the game, though, but none more so than the space travel. This had to be the most disappointing aspect of the game by far. Considering this is a space exploration game, with pretty decent flight controls at that, you don't actually fly around in space. No matter how long I blast my ship towards this planet, I'll never be able to make contact with the atmosphere. Why? Because the only way to land your ship on a planet is to select it in a menu. You don't physically fly your ship down into the planet like you would in, say, Star Citizen. Instead, you watch a cinematic of your ship touching down on the planet for you. Like, what is the point of me having a ship if I can't fly it through space? I can quite literally fast travel between planets I've visited before without needing my ship. I can fast travel to the orbit of any planet I want, even if I'm knee-deep in a cave and nowhere near my ship. Star Citizen is roughly a decade old now, and it did this concept miles better than Starfield has. I perfectly understand if you want to have grav jumping still be a loading screen, as hyper jumping in Star Citizen takes ages if you're travelling long distances. But not being able to fly manually down onto the planet's atmosphere completely destroys the point in being able to fly the ship in the first place. Considering Star Citizen managed to pull this off years before Starfield did, it should have been more than possible here. There's no excuse. Of course, a Starfield review wouldn't be complete without talking about the discourse surrounding the game's inclusion of pronouns in the character creation menu. Me personally, I made my female character, set her pronouns to Slay Queen, and went about my day enjoying the game to its fullest extent. Some people quit at this screen and labelled this game as terrible purely based on their mere inclusion. This screen appears within the first 15 minutes of playtime. They decided to forego preventing a mass extinction event, infiltrating a piracy organization, bounty hunting, acquiring godlike powers, being hunted by super advanced beings, and potentially many more interesting plot points, all because the game asked them how their character identifies itself. This is a level of petty I have never seen before, and anyone criticizing the game based on that should not be taken seriously. It doesn't affect the game negatively in the slightest. Even though Starfield is a pretty mixed bag, if you can find it in yourself to look past the negatives, you'll find the elements of the game that made Skyrim and Fallout 4 so iconic. Granted, it might be a bit tough to do that if, like me, you've played Star Citizen and was expecting much more freedom of movement with your ship. It plays like a decade-old game and uses outdated design techniques that are totally unwarranted. If anything, this game shows how unwilling Bethesda is to take risks and innovate past their ready-made recipe for success. Every element of Starfield can be found in another game done better, from the shooting and looting system all the way to space traversal and combat. But even though another game might do one element better, it might be completely missing an element that Starfield has. Call of Duty might have miles better gunplay, but it isn't an open-world space exploration game. Additionally, there are plenty of instances throughout the game that shine a light on the corner-cutting Bethesda had to do in order to deliver something of this scale. Everything Starfield does is serviceable at best. It's a jack of all trades but a master of none, the essence of what it means to be mid, and a 5 out of 10 at best. Perhaps if it had more time in development, it could have truly surpassed all of our expectations. But for now, I guess we'll have to continue waiting for a truly next-gen open-world experience. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I implore you to check out my Patreon. I've built up quite the repertoire of content over there, so signing up would net you quite a large bonus from me. If you do, you could potentially end up here in the credits. I want to give a special thanks to my top tier patrons who are showing up on the screen now, as well as a massive thank you to everyone else who supports the channel. Liking and sharing the video also helps me out tremendously, and if you hit that subscribe button, then I will likely see you in the next video. And I'm gone. The lack of accessibility. The gun combat fear. Oh my god. I just.
Yo, this is the funniest shit I've ever seen.